If you've never done it, you don't know what you've missed.
It's like a drug, isn't it? Amazing. It's there forever.
It's just that wonderful feeling of floating on air.
To be on an edge, that is, it's a wonderful feeling.
I wouldn't want to go base jumping or jumping out of a plane with a parachute. I get my thrill out of going on the ice.
That hasn't been skated on or anything, and it is wonderful. It's nearly black ice.
When you get on the ice every winter for the first time, the feeling it's just freedom.
You almost begin to smell it in the air, the frost, and we always say your feet begin to tingle.
It's almost like a drug. If there is ice at Bury Fen, it's there and you've got to be there, you've got to be part of it.
You'll even make do with almost a frozen puddle if it's a question of getting your skates on and just say, well, I've been.
Don't forget your bloody skates next time, you plonker.
It's flat. I mean, in a word, the Fens are a most marvellous place. It's a reclaimed, man-made landscape, of course, the old flooded marshlands of the Middle Ages, with these fascinating, mostly 17th century drainage ditches passing through it. There's nowhere else like it anywhere in the country.
Basically, anywhere under about 50 feet above sea level contour could be described as Fenland, which was mainly drained by the three big rivers and tributaries and the hundreds of drainage canals.
To get the water away from Bedfordshire, they cut this fantastic river, the Bedford as it was called then. And then a few years later they realised that wasn't doing the job well enough, so they made another one, the New Bedford River, which then meant that there was this wonderful area about half a mile wide and 15 miles long that regularly floods, and if the weather conditions are right, it freezes over. A lot of the tradition of fen skating came over with the Dutch. In the winter, when the rivers and washes were frozen, it meant that people could get about. Going skating was a little bit of physical activity, keeping warm, would have been a bit of fun.
Winter in the Fens could be a desperate time. The tradition in Victorian times was that when it froze and no work could be done because of the cold weather, the frost, when all the farm workers were laid off with no pay.
The normal labourers and people who were desperate to skate were doing it to win a joint of beef or some item that would keep their family going.
It might well have been a case of, well, one farmer was in the pub that night talking to his mate, well, my man's better than your man. Well, OK, if you think he is, well, we'll prove it. We'll have a race. Well, what we're going to put up as a prize, because if we don't put a prize up, why are they going to skate as fast as they can? So one guy, well, we'll perhaps put a pint of beer up, or a loaf of bread, or a side of pork, or something like that.
To have this attractive sport and pastime going on, and their own local heroes taking part and beating all comers, especially in the hard Victorian winters, I think it must have been very important to the community spirit of the people in the Fenland villages.
It was certainly documented going back into the 1700s and 1800s, and I think then racing was probably very informal. They stuck largely to racing in a straight line between two barrels, which were set out either a quarter or a half a mile apart.
A big barrel at one end of the course, and then 400 yards later another barrel, and they do however many loops they need to for the required distance. Makes it very easy for setting a course out.
There were either artificial places to skate, which I'd describe as some of these canals. There were rivers that were natural. There were very large meres, and also we had areas that could be artificially flooded.
It was a very popular sport. We've got engravings going right back to the 1820s, showing the huge crowds of people that were there.
There was trains laid on to bring people from London, especially to come down and watch these skating matches. There's all sorts of stories about over 4,000 people going through the turnstiles at Littleport.
The railway came here about 1847, and they used to come down from London, get off the train, through the gate where you paid to come in, and you were on the moors.
Trains would come down from Cambridge and park on the railway line adjacent to the moors. And, the passengers would sit and watch the skating from the train.
It was a sort of cup-final atmosphere of the day back in the 19th century, and the champions of skaters were very important people and much respected.
Turkey Smart and got to purchase C and some of these guys like that, they were the heroes of the day. Why Turkey Smart got the name of Turkey Smart. He was one of the first people to skate with both his arms behind his back, with his chest stuck out, and he looked like a turkey strutting about the farmyard.
Larman Register, the big little port man of the 1850s, once for a bet raced against a train on the railway between Littleport and Ely, and the story is that despite the fireman from the train throwing cinders onto the ice as the train went over a river bridge, he still skated into Ely half a minute before the train arrived in the station, so he won his bet.
There was various factions, villages, clubs, had their skaters who they reckon were best, were champions. It's fair to say that in some instances there was probably a little bit of cheating going on because betting was rife and money was tight and all the rest of it. Bearing in mind it was the Victorian age, it was the mid-1800s, gentlemen wanted to get hold of this skating business in the Fens and say, let's regularise it, let's put it into some sort of format. And the upshot was that in 1879 the National Skating Association was formed in Cambridge.
They drew up various regulations for racing and distances and the type of skates that should be used.
They were skating on what everybody calls fen runners, which was a very basic, very agricultural style of skate.
They are designed to fit onto the bottom of a leather working boot. This type of skate had been in use for at least 200 years or more, and didn't change until the modern skate came in from Norway.
This is the revolutionary Norwegian racing skate design that came in the 1890s, with the tubular metal body replacing the old wooden footstock. So the design is very light, very low and very fast.
It is quite unusual to think that back in 1893 or whatever it was, we actually had the world champion. The best speed skater in the world came from Welny.
There are still posters to this day in Holland of James Smart. Such was the high regard that the Dutch had for his skating ability.
Once the Norwegian skates arrived on the scene, then so did the Norwegians, and they had months and months of hard winter weather to practice in, and so they could outclass both the Fens skaters and the Dutch skaters, and they started taking all the international titles. It knocked out James Smart's career as a champion skater, but James Smart bounced back in a different way. He set up as the sole agent for the Hagen racing skates, and it's his franchise that's then passed on to J.H. Adams in Littleport, and so the shop sort of takes on the premier skating import franchise in the country.
As I was told the story, James Smart got into difficulty with money with the business, and in way of paying off the debt, he signed over the UK import licence, which he had himself negotiated from Hagen's, the famous skate makers from Norway. Adams took over the UK import licence and then became the place where people bought their skates from.
This is a normal ledger that shows all different kinds of things that were sold in the shop. But tucked away at the back is a special section all about skates. He was a major supplier for ice skates within the whole area, not just for Cambridgeshire and parts of the Wash as well, and parts of Lincolnshire. There we go, the National Skating Association in London. So he supplied skates there too. We've actually found some ice skates in the shop. They were bought here and they were also sharpened here or repaired here.
That's the main thing with them, to keep good sharp skates. That one I got it bent and I took it to Adams and got it straightened and sharpened. When you got really good, you could put your hand behind your back and lean forward and sort of cut the wind off a bit. I can't even stand up on them now.
Obviously the skates were stored up here or were on display up here, and they had some surface put on the floor to obviously try out these skates, and it was obviously quite a big trade, I would imagine.
Now you see you stand here, how many world champions stood here and tried the skates out? UK champions, local champions. Could tell some stories, couldn't it?
I know when my father used to be down here, they used to hold races and that, and I think he won enough money to buy a pair of Norwegian ice skates, which I've still got in the cupboard. I think my father paid about 27 and sixpence for his skates.
So everyone had a pair of skates back in those days, from children up to grandmothers. A very important service and network being provided by the shops in all the Fenland towns and villages, and providing the skates for the local people.
As ice rinks became popular in the 20s, there was an element of speed skating going on to ice rinks. The National Skating Association for ice rinks became more important, and our guys, to do with the fen skating, effectively became what is now known as the Fen Centre.
The Fenmen, being Fenmen, were very reluctant to moving to have the continental oval course. Up until virtually the last war, they were still having majority of races around barrels.
My father was a very, very keen ice skater, and I suppose 5 or 6 years old, he somehow got hold of a pair of old Fen runners. He put the skates on me, put me on his piggyback, took me across to the field, and I was hooked.
I was about 8, and I remember going on we called them lows, like a grass field with low places which fill with water, and it was wooden skates. When I came home from school, wooden skates.
We used to go skating on the wash in the moonlight, good nights. Skating. Everybody used to love skating from our area, yeah. I worked on the land, but I didn't bother about work if I could skate.
I can remember going with my dad to Grimsthorpe Lake, and we ventured out onto the ice, and there was about 7 or 8 of us together, and all of a sudden it cracked. And I've never seen people move so quick before without skates on.
My earliest recollection actually of racing was that once again I was at school and it had been incredibly cold. It was 1954 and there was no water around, but it was amazingly cold, and they held championships on the washwater at the sewage farm at Milton near Cambridge. They put on a lot of boys racing on the Saturday morning. The locals in the village said, "Oh, go on boy, you've got to have a go," and that was my introduction to racing as a 10-year-old on a pair of old Fen runners. I didn't win anything, but it was a great feeling, and I think that's really started me off.
When the Lincolnshire was held down Baston Fen on a special flooded field then, that's the first time I raced in 1962, that cold, long winter. Well, it went on for 3 months. And I brought my skate that I'll say they're size 10 and I take a 7, 3 pairs of socks, and I came second in the Fen Championship. And I was 17.
Racing is a big part of fen skating, but it's not the most important. You do the best that you can, and then you turn around and cheer on your opponents, which is almost counterintuitive because well, if they do well, they're going to beat you. Just being part of a traditional pastime is fantastic. The racing is the cherry on the cake.
Those who are slightly more elderly will remember clearly 1963, which was very severe indeed. It was notable from the fact that from early January all the way through until the beginning of March, one could, without any problem, skate every single day.
I remember it quite vividly. We got on the Old West River and we skated through to Erith Locks and back on a Sunday afternoon, and that was a round trip of 12.5 miles. And the interesting thing was, there was a guy in the river fishing, and he'd actually made a hole in the ice, Eskimo fashion, and I put my hand in, and got my hand underneath the ice, and it came to my elbow, so the ice was about 15 inches thick in '63. So that was quite an experience. I don't think it would ever happen again, and I'm glad it did.
Everybody keeps saying, oh, we don't get winters like we used to. And then 85, 86 and 87. So we had 3 consecutive winters, and in each of those 3 consecutive winters, we had more than 3 weeks worth of racing.
I would contend that, in fact, the golden era was those 3 years in the 1980s, where it was superb skating. I mean, and we were skating everywhere.
One of those years, I raced every day, a heat and a final, for 10 days. And I was getting faster. Towards the end, I was doing faster times than when I started. I wasn't getting tireder, I was getting faster.
Next to race are Alan Fisher and David Smith. This is in fact the final of the Doubleton Cup.
I'm not sure whether it was 86 or 87, but I skated on the ice at Erith after the 11th day of thaw. We stopped racing and the temperature went above freezing and the ice started to go, and 12 days later it was still strong enough for me to be able to skate on. I think the ice was over 2 foot thick.
May I say thank you to Mr. Edward Dow for letting us use his ice.
We used up all the cups that we had for 3 years on the trot, and unfortunately since then the racing has been much more sparse.
Come on, Richard!
I still actually maintain that if we could have a really sharp winter, that in fact the interest would be there, and then it would be up and away again.
It looks so easy, just cruising around there. I spend more time on my backside than on them.
We're all far too old to be down here, but make the most of it while you can is my motto.
It's quite remarkable actually, because I mean, I'm 67, I should be 68 in April. And yet when I got word last night that they were skating here, I was like a 15-year-old kid again, and I was sort of couldn't settle. I got to be on it.
To be not the first on the ice is disappointing. It's always nice to be one of the first on, but it's even worse if you didn't manage to get there that day and then weather conditions change and the ice goes, so you've missed out.
Once you've got the bug, as it were, it's there forever, and long may it be so. Particularly mornings like this, I mean, it's superb.
Occasionally you get a day where the weather is such that there just doesn't appear to be any wind, warm sun on your face, and you see the swans flying over on the blue sky, and all you can hear is the crack of the ice of other people as they're skating around. It's phenomenal.
Hello.
Day 1 there may be 5 or 10 people on it. Day 3 there's perhaps 500. It hasn't been on any social media, hasn't been in the newspapers. It's just spread through this Fenland grapevine of, well, you tell John and John will tell Mick and Mick will tell Fred. It is a completely bizarre community.
Same time, same place, same company.
It draws people together, no doubt about that. It doesn't matter whether you're a millionaire or whether you're a pauper. When you're on the ice, you're an ice skater. And we're all the same.
Keep your ears open, keep your eyes open, keep your mind open, and if you get the opportunity, grab it with both hands.